From Washington, D.C., the Reverend Martin Luther King, Jr., President of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, will face the nation. In a live, spontaneous, and unrehearsed news interview, Dr. King will be questioned by CBS News correspondent Dan Rather. Benjamin Bradley, Washington Bureau Chief of Newsweek magazine. To lead the questioning, here is CBS News correspondent Paul Niven.
Dr. King, welcome to Face the Nation. We'd like to ask you about this summer's demonstrations, the white backlash, the Senate filibuster, the November elections, and charges of communist infiltration of the civil rights movement. We'll begin the questioning in just a moment. Dr. King, back in March, you were talking about beginning demonstrations in early May in Alabama and perhaps also here in Washington against the Senate filibuster. What has happened to those plans?
Well, these plans are still intact. We may have revised the dates a bit, but we definitely plan to have massive demonstrations in the state of Alabama this summer. We feel that the time has come for a full-scale assault on the system of segregation in Alabama, and certainly the hypocrisy of the governor of that state needs to be exposed, so that we plan to work in several communities in the state of Alabama. In fact, we are now recruiting students by the hundreds and thousands to join what we refer to as our nonviolent army. And they will constitute the persons who will engage in these demonstrations all over the state. We will center the demonstrations around the right to vote, around public accommodations, and all of the external manifestations of segregation in the state.
Starting when, Doctor?
We haven't set the exact date yet, but we feel that it will have to get underway immediately after school is out. Many of our participants will be students, and we're trying to wait until the closing of school. So this would be about the last of May, the 1st of June.
What difference, Dr. King, will passage or non-passage of the Civil Rights Bill make in all your plans for the summer's demonstrations? I mean, will they go on if it passes, and if it doesn't pass, will it make any difference?
Well, I'm sure we will have demonstrations whether you get a Civil Rights Bill passed or not. Now, I would say that if the bill is passed, it will increase the hope and give the Negro a new faith in the legislative process, and I think it will be possible to keep the demonstrations much more disciplined and nonviolent. On the other hand, if the bill passes, we can see another element present, namely that it will be necessary to enforce it. Passing the bill is simply one step. After it is passed, it must be enforced, and we will have to go into communities all over the South to test compliance. There will be some communities that will comply, and maybe in these communities we won't have to have large-scale demonstrations, but where you have outright resistance and a refusal to comply with the Civil Rights Bill if it passes, we will have to demonstrate in order to get the federal government to take a stand in the area of enforcement.
Dr. King, I'm interested to know why the dates of starting the massive demonstrations has been pushed back. Has the White House been any influence in this?
No, not at all. We haven't discussed demonstrations with the White House at all. Neither the Alabama demonstrations or our plans for Washington. Now, I may say on the Washington plans that we have been a little confused and at points frustrated concerning the developments here. On the one hand, you have a real filibuster taking place, but on the other hand, it is clothed in the garments of a sort of gentlemanly debate. And this has brought about a lot of confusion. Many people watching the processes taking place in the legislative halls of our nation feel that things are moving along all right. But deep down within, I must confess that things aren't moving all right, and I'm really appalled and distressed at what appears to be a sort of behind the scenes, certainly a backdoor trading away of vital sections of the Civil Rights Bill by persons who just a few weeks ago made it clear that they would not support any crippling amendments.
Who are some of those persons?
Well, I wouldn't like to give any names. I would simply say that some officials of the Justice Department and some senators. I'm appalled at some of the things taking place and agreements being made with Senator Dirksen. These are crippling amendments, and the whole purpose is to so emasculate that bill that it will have no meaning. And this is confusing. I think it is unfair to the American public. It is unfair to all of the individuals who have stood out in such a forthright manner for civil rights.
Which of the proposed amendments do you find unacceptable?
Well, I would go right down the line. I think the jury trial amendment is certainly unacceptable. One only needs look to the South and see that a jury, by and large, an all-white jury, will not convict a white person for doing anything to a Negro, a white person who disobeys a court order, from the De La Beckwiths of Mississippi on through Alabama and many other things taking place. So this is objectionable. I think any of the amendments that call for voluntary compliance rather than compulsory enforcement are objectionable. Because it just isn't going to be done that way, and I stand on the idea that we must have compulsory enforcement. Also, the amendments which place the burden of responsibility for suits on the individual rather than on the federal government, and this is what we see through all of the Dirksen amendments. And I think they are very bad for the whole nation, and I think those who are going along with it are really playing with dynamite and playing with the health of our nation.
What kind of communication, Dr. King, are you maintaining with the Senator Humphrey and the Justice Department on the progress of this bill?
I have talked with them several times since the Civil Rights Bill came into being and since the debate. I haven't had any communication, though, over the last few weeks. And I am so concerned about this now that I plan to talk with them in the next few days.
With who, specifically?
Well, mainly with Senator Humphrey and Senator Kiko and other liberal senators who are leading the fight for the Civil Rights Bill.
How united is the Negro leadership on this bill? In other words, if these senators wanted to find out if such and such an amendment was acceptable to the Negroes, who would they talk to? In other words, are you agreed with the SNCC people and the NAACP people?
Well, we've talked about this a good deal in what is known as a Unity Council of Civil Rights Leadership with all of the heads of civil rights organizations, and we all agree absolutely that the bill should pass in the Senate just as it passed in the House, and we don't want to see any amendments. There may be some technical changes in language and that kind of thing, but any amendment which changes a House bill and weakens that bill would be unacceptable.
Well, Dr. King, it's quite clear that it can't be passed without substantive amendments. Wouldn't you prefer to have half or two-thirds of a loaf than no loaf at all?
Well, it depends on the sections where you have the compromise. I must frankly say that the section dealing with outlawing segregation in public accommodations, the section dealing with equal employment opportunities, and the section dealing with cutting off federal funds in federally assisted projects where you have discrimination are so important that I would rather see no bill at all than a bill devoid of these sections in a strong sense. I think it would merely bring into being new hope in the Negro community, and pretty soon Negroes would come to see that they don't have anything, and we would be in a worse situation than we are now.
Dr. King, do you plan to attend both of the national political conventions this summer?
Yes, I do.
What do you intend to do there?
We have planned, we will work together in the civil rights organizations seeking to seat delegates and unseat what we consider improper representatives because the Negro is denied the right to vote in several states. And there is a real possibility that we will have a march on both of these conventions calling for strong civil rights enforcement, strong civil rights legislation in areas where we may not get it in this particular bill, and a strong stand on the part of both parties in the area of civil rights.
How about the once talked about plans of holding a third convention, a civil rights convention, after the Democratic and Republican nominating sessions?
Well, I have no plans on that, and I don't know whether the other organizations will follow through on it or not.
Dr. King, continuing with politics just a little. President Johnson has just had a triumphal tour through parts of the South. Do you feel that the South will vote for him, support him, or any Republican candidate?
I think if the election were held today, President Johnson would carry the South overwhelmingly. There may be one or two exceptions like Mississippi and Alabama, but I think he would carry it overwhelmingly because he is a Southerner. I think there's a great deal of pride on the part of Southerners because the Southerners in the White House. I don't see any Republican candidate at this point who can carry the South over President Johnson, even Senator Goldwater.
What about the Republican Party generally in the North? What kind of support among Negroes does it enjoy now?
Well, it will depend on the candidate. I think in this election year, more than any other, the Negro will vote for the candidate and the party that will take a forthright, determined, and consistent stand on the civil rights issue. And if a strong Republican candidate is nominated who takes a very strong position at this point, I'm sure that he can get some support in the Negro community. It is difficult to say at this point, or impossible to say, whether that person could get more support than President Johnson. I think it will depend on developments over the next few months. Certainly President Johnson is taking a strong stand now, and if this continues, I'm sure that he will get great support from the Negro voters.
Dr. King, do you intend to campaign actively for one candidate or the other in November?
No, I certainly don't intend to campaign for any candidate. Now, I must confess that I am moving now into what I consider the valley of decision, trying to determine whether I will do something in this election that I've never done before, namely publicly endorsing a candidate. There is a possibility that I will do this for the first time, but I don't plan to actively campaign for any candidate, even though I may endorse.
Dr. King, it's often been said in the past that Negro voters held the balance in many marginal congressional districts. Well, now that Governor Wallace has shown he can get 30 or 35% of the vote in northern states, isn't it likely that the white backlash vote is going to exceed the Negro vote in many districts?
I don't think so. I think this is a temporary development, and I feel that there are so many factors in the Wallace vote that we can't consider this decisive and even impressive. I think you have to consider the fact that a vote for Wallace is often a vote against the person against whom he's running. It doesn't necessarily mean that it is a vote against civil rights. And I think once you get a strong candidate campaigning and running, we will see a different picture altogether. I think the Wallace vote does reveal that prejudice is a national problem and not merely a sectional one. But on the other hand, I don't think it reveals that there is the kind of strong revolt against Negro aspirations that many people in the press are now saying. In fact, a poll just the other day, the Harris poll, revealed that the vast majority of American people are still in favor of the Civil Rights Bill, a 3-1 margin at that point. And I think this represents something, and it tells us that the backlash isn't as great as many people feel.
Dr. King, in light of recent statements of Senator Barry Goldwater and, in some cases, Richard Nixon, do you think there is a real danger of the Republican Party becoming the white man's party in this country?
I think this is a real danger, and I've talked with some Negro Republicans who are very concerned about this. I see trends and developments which will reveal that unless the liberals of the Republican Party take play a much more decisive role in leadership positions, this will become a white man's party. And I think this would be tragic for the Republican Party as well as tragic for the nation.
Well, when you're talking then about possibly endorsing a candidate, you're talking about endorsing President Johnson.
No, I'm not. I don't know who the Republican nominee will be.
Is there any Republican that's been mentioned as a possibility for the presidency that you would endorse over President Johnson?
I don't know at this point. I would have to watch the campaign and see how it goes and the stands that are taken and talk with some of these men. There are some very fine statesmen who are seeking the nomination. Men like Governor Rockefeller of New York, and although Mr. Lodge isn't seeking the nomination at this point, there's a possibility that he can get it, and I know him as a strong man, and of course Governor Scranton and others. I can assure you that if Senator Goldwater is the nominee, I could not at any point endorse him, and I don't think he would get any votes to mention in the Negro community.
Dr. King, you said on March 26th there will be direct action in Washington if there is a determined filibuster to weaken the bill. Now, you've said today that the bill is in the process of being weakened. Where is the direct action? What plans do you have?
Well, I haven't made any plans to do away with this action. This is still in our minds, and I will, in the next few days, as I said earlier, talk with some of the senators who are in the leadership at this point to determine just where we are on the Civil Rights Bill. I would think of direct action, as I said some weeks ago, as a last resort approach here in Washington, and I would be the first to say that I hope we won't have to do it. But if I can see a determined move to weaken this bill and see retreat on the part of our real friends in this struggle, who happen to be in the Senate, then I think something will have to be done to dramatize and expose this blatant abuse of the legislative process. So this will be determined over the next few days.
Well, Dr. King, is it not true that the senators who are in the middle of this debate are senators without large Negro blocks in their own states? And can you possibly influence them?
I think they can be influenced. We must come to see that this is a moral issue, and even though large numbers of Negroes may not live in the state of, say, a Senator Hicken or others, they must recognize the fact that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, and if this bill does not go through, it will jeopardize the strength, the maturity, and health of our nation. And I think the religious forces in these particular states will continue to work, and I think this is an encouraging thing. Even though you may not have many Negroes there, with the ministerial leadership, clergymen generally working to get them to see the moral issues involved, I think we can pull some of them over.
Dr. King, let me see if I understand. There are no specific plans that you know of at the moment for a march on the Capitol or a march on Washington this year?
Well, there are no plans for a march on Washington this year, as I know of. But I know of plans to have some kind of action around the Civil Rights Bill in Washington if that bill continues to drift in the realm of a filibuster or a determined attempt to weaken it.
Well, if it continues to drift, or if there are these efforts to weaken the bill materialize, what specifically is planned?
Well, I'm not at liberty to say at this point the type of action that will take place, but it will certainly be centered on the whole question of this abuse of the legislative process, and it will be centered on the question of the filibuster and the need for the bill. Now, I am not saying this will be drastic civil disobedience. It will be nonviolent, it will be peaceful, but we hope will be strong enough to mobilize the forces of goodwill around this bill. We find now that the forces of darkness are much more active, zealous, and conscientious and determined than the forces of light. And we feel that that is a need now to mobilize the forces of goodwill in our nation behind this bill in order to counteract the developments that are taking place by the conservative reactionary forces of our nation.
Dr. King, we'd like to ask you about alleged communist infiltration of the civil rights movement, and we'll get to that subject in just one moment. Dr. King, it's been alleged that you have been slow to sever your ties with alleged communists in the civil rights movement, even after government officials have warned you against them. Would you comment?
Yes, I'm very happy that this question came up because I think it's time for it to be buried all over the nation, and I think it's unfortunate that forces of ill will have continued to raise this issue all over the South, and now other forces in the nation have taken it up. First, I'd like to say that communism is based on an ethical relativism, a metaphysical materialism, a denial of human freedom, and a crippling totalitarianism that I could never accept. It is in the Constitution of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference that no communist can be in the membership, certainly not in any official position, and we are very vigilant in grappling with this problem. And whenever my attention has been called to the presence of one who may have been influenced by the Communist Party in surrounding our organization, we immediately take a stand against it. We've had only one case where we asked for the resignation of a person who had been affiliated with the Communist Party. So I would say in general that there is no truth in the idea that communists are infiltrating the movement in any significant numbers. One or two may drift in here and there, but when you speak of infiltration, it means persons in policy-making positions, in leadership positions, and this just isn't true. And I would like for those who are saying that communists are in the movement to let us know who they are so we can get rid of them, because we certainly don't want them in this movement.
Dr. King, are you speaking now of your own organization or of the Negro movement generally? Are you denying that there has been considerable communist influence in the movement generally, or just in your organization?
I'm denying both. I'm denying that there has been any infiltration in the Southern Christian Leadership Conference in particular, and in the civil rights movement in general. Now, as I said, there may be instances where a communist will drift into a demonstration, will drift into the movement, but this is not the main trend, I'm sure. And to say that you have infiltration means that these people have moved in on the leadership policy-making level, and I have not seen this in any of the organizations. All of the organizations, I think, have been very vigilant at this point.
Well, this places you in the direct opposite position of the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, J. Edgar Hoover, who gave some testimony recently to the contrary.
Yes, I think it was very unfortunate that such a great man as Mr. Hoover allowed himself to aid and abet the racists and the rightists in our nation by alleging that you have communist infiltration in the movement. If he had said it another way, I would quite agree with it, that we must not minimize this attempt on the part of communists to get in, but on the other hand, we must not maximize it and stress the fact that they are in the movement. This just isn't true, and I would hope that the FBI would come out and say something that I think is much more significant, and that is that it is amazing that so few Negroes have turned to communism in the light of that desperate plight. I think it is one of the amazing developments of the 20th century, how loyal the Negro has remained to America in spite of his long night of oppression and discrimination.
Dr. King, has the Justice Department told you about any person that they suspected of being identified with communism, the Communist Party, that you have not publicly removed?
Not at all. Not at all.
There was one person that they did identify, and he was removed, but there's been nobody else.
Nobody else. The only person that they identified that had any connection with the Southern Christian Leadership Conference was removed. He's been off of our staff a long, long time.
Gentlemen, I'm sorry, but our time is up. Thank you, Dr. King, for being our guest today on Face the Nation. We'll have a concluding word in a moment.
Today on Face the Nation, the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., president of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, was interviewed by CBS News correspondent Dan Rather. Benjamin Bradley, Washington bureau chief of Newsweek magazine, and CBS News correspondent Paul Niven. Next week, another prominent figure in the news will face the nation. Face the Nation was broadcast live from Washington, D.C.